I'm Olivia Reynolds, 34 years old, and until last month, I was the COO of Reynolds Fashions, our family's retail clothing chain worth millions. For 6 years, I poured 70-hour weeks into building what my father started, believing family and business were inseparable. Then came that Tuesday afternoon, sitting in a corner cafe, when my mother's voicemail shattered everything. "You're out of the family business. Expect a call from our lawyer." My hands trembled as I processed those 11 words that erased years of sacrifice. If you're watching this, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're watching from in the comments. Let me share how I discovered that family loyalty has its limits, and sometimes the quietest response speaks the loudest. Reynolds Fashions wasn't just a business, it was the altar at which our family worshipped. My father, George Reynolds, started with a single boutique in Seattle back in 1985, selling designer clothes he personally selected from New York and Milan. His eye for fashion trends that would resonate with upper-middle-class professionals turned one store into 3 within 5 years. My mother, Vivian, initially handled the books while raising 3 children, but her sharp business instincts eventually positioned her as my father's equal partner, and later, his superior in decision-making. Growing up, I watched this dynamic shift as mother's influence grew alongside the company's expansion. Our childhood wasn't typical by any standard. While other kids spent weekends at sleepovers or soccer games, the Reynolds children were learning inventory management and customer service on store floors. My 16th birthday wasn't celebrated with friends. Instead, I received my first spreadsheet assignment analyzing seasonal sales patterns. My older brother Marcus, 2 years my senior, was clearly positioned as the golden child from early on. Mother constantly praised his natural leadership despite his impulsive decision-making. My middle sister Rebecca couldn't bear the pressure and constant comparison. At 22, she announced she wanted nothing to do with Reynolds Fashions and moved to Portland to become an art teacher. The family practically disowned her for years, speaking her name only in disappointed whispers. I took a different path, believing I could earn my place through competence and education. I studied business at Wharton, earned my MBA with honors, and even worked for 2 years at a French luxury retailer to bring international perspective back to Reynolds Fashions. When I returned at 28, the company had expanded to 15 stores across the Pacific Northwest, but was struggling with modernization. E-commerce was an afterthought, and inventory management systems were still largely manual. I immediately identified opportunities for growth and efficiency. Within 2 years of implementing my strategies, we increased profits by 30%, expanded to 23 locations, and built a robust online presence that accounted for 25% of total revenue. Despite these successes, my position in the family hierarchy remained unchanged. My father's Parkinson's diagnosis gradually removed him from daily operations, leaving my mother firmly in control. She maintained the title of CEO, while I did most of the operational heavy lifting as COO. Marcus held the title of Chief Brand Officer, which mainly involved attending fashion shows and making occasional appearances in stores for morale. This ownership structure reflected decades of family politics. Mother held 45%, I had managed to secure 40% through my father's support before his condition worsened, and Marcus held 15%. Every minor victory in the business came with a personal cost. Decision-making meetings frequently ended with my mother saying things like, "That may work at some European company, but this is a family business built on tradition." Each time I brought in qualified professionals to strengthen our team, Marcus would whisper concerns about outsiders not understanding our values. Despite these frustrations, I remained dedicated to Reynolds Fashions. I declined lucrative offers from major retail corporations, turned down a venture capital firm wanting my expertise for their fashion investments, and postponed my personal life repeatedly. I convinced myself that the business was worth these sacrifices, that someday my contributions would be fully recognized, and that ultimately, family would choose loyalty over control. The truth was, I was sustaining a fantasy that my family valued my contributions as much as I valued being part of something we built together. The early warning signs were there in the small exclusions, the sidebar conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, and the decisions already made before meetings formally began. But I wasn't ready to see the pattern until it was impossible to ignore. The first major crack in my family business facade appeared after I spearheaded a marketing campaign that gained national attention. We partnered with an up-and-coming sustainable fashion designer and launched an eco-friendly collection that got featured in Vogue and generated our highest single-quarter revenue in company history. During the celebratory dinner, my mother raised a toast to the wonderful marketing team, without mentioning my name once, while Marcus sat silently examining his wine glass instead of acknowledging months of my strategic planning. When business publications reached out for interviews, Mother insisted on being the sole spokesperson, relegating my role to team effort status in press releases. The slight stung, but I rationalized it as my mother's generational approach to leadership. My intuition screamed that something was wrong when the executive team met to discuss our West Coast expansion strategy. I'd prepared an extensive analysis of the Los Angeles market, including potential locations, demographic reports, and projected revenues based on our previous expansion patterns. 5 minutes into my presentation, Marcus interrupted with an entirely different proposal for San Diego, complete with flashy renderings of storefronts but minimal financial projections. Mother immediately pivoted the conversation to his idea, saying, "This feels more aligned with the Reynolds brand." They approved his plan without even allowing me to finish presenting my data. 6 months later, the San Diego location was hemorrhaging money, with overhead costs nearly double what the market could sustain. During an emergency financial review, Marcus blamed the failure on lack of support from operations, implicitly pointing the finger at me. When I presented documentation showing I had expressed concerns about the location's lease terms from the beginning, Mother accused me of keeping records to assign blame rather than finding solutions. The board meeting that followed became the point of no return in our family dynamics. Quarterly numbers were down 15%, primarily due to the San Diego debacle and a poorly executed inventory system Marcus had insisted on implementing against my recommendation. When the CFO, one of the few executives I had personally recruited, presented the financial impact of these decisions, Marcus exploded, "This is what happens when we let outsiders influence family business decisions." I couldn't stay silent. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results, I said calmly. We've ignored data-driven recommendations 3 quarters in a row, and our numbers reflect that. Mother's eyes turned to ice. That's enough, Olivia. Your brother is trying innovative approaches while you're stuck in spreadsheets and numbers. Not everything is about data. The chill in our relationship spread beyond the boardroom. Mother began excluding me from key meetings, scheduling them when I had immovable client appointments, or simply forgetting to add me to calendar invites. My weekly one-on-one with her was repeatedly canceled due to more pressing matters. Even casual family dinners became battlegrounds of passive-aggressive comments and sidelong glances. I tried bridging the widening gap through personal gestures, believing that strengthening family bonds might heal our professional relationship. I organized a surprise 70th birthday party for Mother, carefully including all her favorite things and people. She seemed genuinely touched, but the very next day reverted to treating me like an employee rather than a daughter or business partner. The company's annual leadership retreat became the warning shot I should have heeded more seriously. Traditionally held at a mountain resort in Aspen, this was where we set strategic direction for the upcoming year. I arrived a day late due to finalizing a major vendor contract, only to discover that Mother and Marcus had already conducted several planning sessions with the executive team. The 5-year vision document they drafted significantly reduced my department's scope and budget while expanding Marcus's brand division. When I questioned this directly, Mother smiled thinly and said, "We thought you'd appreciate us handling this while you were busy with your vendor negotiations." That evening, while searching for a misplaced presentation file on the company's shared drive, I stumbled upon a confidential folder named Organization Restructure 2024. Inside were draft org charts showing my position diluted, with several of my direct reports reassigned to a new department under Marcus. The document properties showed my mother as the author and had been modified just 2 days earlier. That night, staring at the ceiling of my hotel room, I finally acknowledged what my heart had been denying. Despite owning 40% of Reynolds Fashions, I was being systematically pushed out of the very business I'd helped modernize and grow. The question was no longer if this would happen, but how and when they would make their move, and whether I would let family loyalty override my self-respect when they did. The final phase of my family's betrayal began during negotiations with Lumiere, a prestigious French fashion house interested in creating an exclusive collection for Reynolds Fashions. I had nurtured this relationship for almost a year, leveraging my connections from my time working in Paris. We were 3 weeks from signing a deal that would have differentiated us from every competitor in our market space. One Tuesday morning, my assistant looked uncomfortable as she handed me my schedule. "There must be a mistake," I said, noticing a gap between 2 meetings. "Isn't the Lumiere call at 11? She fidgeted with her tablet. "Your mother asked me to tell you it's been rescheduled." Something in her expression made me press further. "Rescheduled to when?" After an uncomfortable pause, she admitted, "I believe your mother and Marcus are speaking with them now in the main conference room." I walked calmly to the conference room, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Through the glass wall, I saw Mother and Marcus laughing with Jean-Pierre, Lumiere's creative director, who had specifically requested to work with me based on our previous professional relationship. Mother noticed me standing outside and briefly excused herself. "We've got this handled, Olivia," she said, barely opening the door. Jean-Pierre wanted to discuss some concerns about the collection parameters, and I thought it best if senior leadership addressed them directly. "I established this relationship," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "I should be part of any discussion about concerns." Mother's expression hardened. "You're being emotional again. This is why Marcus needs to step in on delicate negotiations. Your attachment to projects clouds your judgment." When I later called Jean-Pierre to understand what had happened, he sounded confused. "Your mother said you were focusing on operations and wouldn't have time for the creative aspects of the collaboration. She assured us this was your preference." The systematic dismantling of my role accelerated after that incident. Emails to my team went mysteriously unanswered until I discovered Mother had instructed them to copy her on all communications with me. Key staff members were reassigned to different departments without consultation. My office was relocated from the executive floor to a smaller space near the IT department during a weekend when I was out of town, explained away as consolidating teams for better collaboration. One afternoon, I spotted William Chen, the company's longtime legal counsel, leaving my mother's office with a thick binder of documents. When he saw me, he quickly looked away and hurried toward the elevator. My administrative access to certain financial systems was revoked for security protocol updates that somehow never affected other executives. The walls were closing in, but I wasn't ready to surrender without understanding my options. I reached out to Richard Daniels, my father's former business advisor who had retired 3 years earlier. We met for coffee at a small cafe far from any Reynolds Fashions locations. "Your father always worried about this," Richard confided after hearing my situation. "Vivian's brilliant with business, but she views control as non-negotiable. George insisted you get that 40% stake because he feared exactly this scenario." "What would you do in my position?" I asked. His eyes crinkled with sympathy. "Document everything. Prepare for all scenarios. And remember that sometimes winning doesn't mean getting your way. It means protecting your value and dignity." Taking his advice, I began meticulously documenting every instance of exclusion and undermining. I backed up important emails and records of my contributions to company growth. I discreetly consulted with a financial advisor about the true value of my ownership stake. In a final attempt to salvage both the family relationship and my professional position, I invited Mother and Marcus to dinner at our father's favorite restaurant, hoping the neutral, sentimental location might open a path to honest conversation. The evening started cordially enough, with reminiscences about Dad's early days building the business. But when I gently broached the subject of recent changes, Mother's demeanor instantly transformed. "I'm disappointed that you're taking business decisions so personally," she said, cutting into her steak with surgical precision. "Your father and I raised you to be resilient, not to whine when things don't go your way." "This isn't about my feelings," I countered. "It's about transparency and respect. I own 40% of this company, but I'm being treated like an expendable employee." Marcus scoffed. "There's more to running Reynolds Fashions than spreadsheets and online sales, Olivia. Some aspects require intuition and relationships you've never quite mastered." The dinner ended with terse goodbyes and no resolution. The next morning, through a casual conversation with my most loyal team member, I learned that an emergency board meeting had been scheduled for the following Monday. The agenda wasn't shared broadly, but my source had overheard Marcus discussing a leadership consolidation plan with one of the board members who regularly sided with my mother. The pieces fell into place. They were planning to vote to remove me from operational control, using the legal minimum required notice so I'd have little time to prepare a defense. Despite the seismic emotional impact of this realization, a strange calm settled over me. For years, I'd been fighting to prove my worth to people who had already decided my place. The question wasn't whether I could win this battle, but whether it was even worth fighting on their terms. Little did I know that the decision would be made for me within 24 hours, with a single voicemail that would change everything. That fateful Tuesday had actually started on a high note. I had just concluded a promising meeting with Aster Group, a retail technology firm interested in creating an exclusive inventory management system for multi-channel fashion retailers. Their CEO had specifically sought me out based on an article I'd written for Retail Business Quarterly about integrating online and physical store inventories. The potential partnership could have revolutionized our operations and positioned Reynolds Fashions as an industry innovator. Energized by the positive meeting, I stopped at Café Lumen, a small artisanal coffee shop 3 blocks from our headquarters, to gather my thoughts before heading back to the office. The tranquil atmosphere with its warm wooden tables and the comforting aroma of freshly ground coffee beans had always been my thinking sanctuary during challenging times at work. I ordered my usual almond milk latte and settled into a corner table to review my notes from the meeting. When my phone vibrated with a voicemail notification, I barely glanced at it, assuming it was the Aster Group's CEO following up on our conversation. The moment I pressed play and heard my mother's voice, something in her tone made my stomach drop. "Olivia, this is your mother," she began, as if I wouldn't recognize her voice after 34 years. "The executive committee met this morning and has unanimously decided that your services as COO are no longer required at Reynolds Fashions. Your resistance to our strategic direction and consistent undermining of leadership decisions leave us no choice. You're out of the family business. Expect a call from our lawyer regarding the terms of your departure. Your building access has been deactivated effective immediately. Please coordinate with HR to retrieve your personal belongings." The cafe's ambient noise faded into a distant hum as my mother's cold voice continued. "This is a business decision, not a family one. I expect you to handle it with the professionalism that befits the Reynolds name." The message ended without even a goodbye. My hands were shaking so violently that coffee spilled over the rim of my cup onto my meeting notes. The barista noticed and brought over napkins, asking if I was okay. I must have nodded, but inside, a tidal wave of emotions threatened to drown me. 6 years of 70-hour work weeks, declined job offers from competitors who would have doubled my salary, postponed relationships and personal goals, the vacation I'd canceled to handle the crisis when Marcus's failed San Diego store opened. The Christmas Eve, I spent reconciling year-end finances because our controller had made errors in the reports due to my brother's rushed deadlines. Birthdays celebrated with hurried cupcakes in the conference room because inventory counts couldn't wait. All of it flashed through my mind in a cruel slideshow of sacrifices made for people who had just discarded me via voicemail. The cafe's walls seemed to close in as tears welled in my eyes. I grabbed my belongings and hurried outside, gulping cool air that did nothing to ease the tightness in my chest. I couldn't face returning to the office or going home where memories of business dinners and strategy sessions haunted every room. Instead, I drove aimlessly, eventually pulling into a scenic overlook above the city. Seattle sprawled below, oblivious to my personal earthquake. My phone continued buzzing with emails and messages I couldn't bring myself to read. Instead, I called the one person who might understand, my sister Rebecca. "They finally did it," I said when she answered, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to maintain composure. Unlike the years of strained communication before, Rebecca didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, she listened as everything poured out of me in a torrent of hurt and betrayal. "Come stay with me for a few days," she offered. "Get some distance before you decide what to do next." I promised to consider it, but knew I needed to understand my options first. My next call was to Patricia Wang, a corporate attorney I'd met through a business women's networking group. She agreed to see me. Immediately, Patricia's office, with its clean lines and spectacular view of Mount Rainier, provided a sense of order my emotions desperately needed. "Based on what you've described, they're hoping to pressure you into a panic sale of your shares," she explained after hearing my story. "They've calculated that your emotional attachment to the business and family relationships will make you vulnerable to accepting less than market value." "Can they really force me out operationally while I own 40%? I asked. "Unfortunately, yes. Your ownership gives you financial rights, but not guaranteed management rights unless specifically outlined in the shareholder agreement." She examined the documents I had brought. "However, they can't force you to sell your shares, and your 40% gives you significant leverage." When I returned home that evening, out of habit, I tried logging into the company's system to check on a vendor payment schedule. "Access denied" flashed on the screen. My company email returned the same message. They had wasted no time in executing the digital excision of my existence at Reynolds Fashions. The thoroughness of my removal felt like salt in an open wound. I spent the night alternating between tears of hurt and rage, between drafting scathing responses and contemplating public exposure of my family's tactics. But as the first light of dawn filtered through my bedroom window, an unusual clarity settled over me. Fighting them on their terms would only drag me deeper into their toxic game. My mother expected me to beg, argue, or threaten legal action. Reactions. That would justify her narrative of me as emotional and unprofessional. Instead, I would respond with the one thing she never anticipated: calm acceptance followed by strategic action. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break or the ammunition of an emotional outburst. Instead, I would use the one true power I had, my 40% ownership, in a way she never expected. With newfound resolve, I showered, dressed in my most confidence-inducing outfit, and prepared to set in motion a plan that would forever change the power dynamics of Reynolds Fashions and my relationship with my family. The realization that I held substantial power through my ownership stake transformed my approach entirely. Rather than reacting emotionally as my mother expected, I decided to make calculated moves that would protect both my financial interests and my dignity. My first call that morning was to Meridian Partners, a private equity firm that had previously expressed interest in Reynolds Fashions during an industry conference. Their managing director, Jonathan Levine, had given me his direct number, saying they were always interested in well-established retail brands with growth potential. "I'm not calling about a complete acquisition," I clarified after explaining my situation. "I'm exploring options for my 40% stake." Jonathan's interest was immediate. "That's a significant minority position. Would you be open to meeting this afternoon?" I agreed, but knew I needed to explore all options before making any decisions. My second call was to Robert Kaplan, my father's former friend and business rival who owned Kaplan & Sons, a competing retail chain with locations, primarily on the East Coast. My father and Robert had maintained a respectful competition for decades, occasionally meeting for brandy and cigars despite being direct competitors. Robert answered on the second ring, his gravelly voice instantly recognizable. "Olivia Reynolds. It's been too long. How's George doing?" The genuine concern in his voice when I updated him about my father's condition reminded me of a time when business relationships had human dimensions. When I explained my situation, Robert's response surprised me. "Those fools. You were the best thing that happened to that company." Vivian always was more concerned with control than growth. His directness was refreshing after years of navigating my mother's passive-aggressive communication style. "I've been looking for West Coast expansion opportunities," he continued. "Acquiring a stake in Reynolds would give us immediate market presence without starting from scratch." By midday, I had scheduled meetings with both Meridian Partners and Robert Kaplan, along with 2 other potential buyers Patricia had suggested. Each meeting required careful preparation to present the true value of my stake. I gathered financial reports, growth projections, and market analysis documents I had fortunately backed up on my personal cloud storage. The next 48 hours became a carefully orchestrated negotiation marathon. I met with Jonathan from Meridian Partners at an upscale hotel conference room, where he brought along their retail division analyst and legal counsel. Their offer was solid but came with complexities around future company direction. Robert Kaplan flew in personally on his private jet, meeting me for dinner at a discreet restaurant outside the city. His approach was more straightforward: a clean purchase at a premium price, with the strategic benefit of gaining significant influence in a direct competitor. The other potential buyers couldn't match either offer. As negotiations progressed, I insisted on strict confidentiality agreements from all parties. The last thing I needed was for news to reach my mother before deals were finalized. Patricia reviewed every document, highlighting potential issues and suggesting strategic amendments to protect my interests. The emotional weight of selling. My stake in the family business hit me during quiet moments between meetings. This wasn't just a financial transaction. It was severing a connection to my father's legacy and acknowledging that my place in the family business had never been secure despite my contributions. Yet with each negotiation session, I felt a growing sense of empowerment replacing the initial hurt and betrayal. By Thursday evening, 48 hours after receiving my mother's voicemail, I had made my decision. Robert Kaplan's offer exceeded Meridian's by 12% and included fewer complications. More importantly, there was a certain poetic justice in selling my shares to my father's biggest competitor, a company that would bring fresh perspectives and challenge the stagnant thinking my mother and brother had been clinging to. The signing meeting took place in Patricia's office. As Robert and I signed the final documents transferring my 40% stake in Reynolds Fashions, he shook my hand firmly. "Your father would be proud of your business acumen, Olivia, and frankly, I'd hire you in a heartbeat if you're interested." I thanked him, but explained I needed time to consider my next steps. The transfer confirmation appeared in my email at 5:47 p.m. Minutes later, as the transaction would be automatically flagged in the company's financial system, I sent a single-word text to my mother. "Understood." I turned off notifications from family members and focused on the practical aspects of separation. That evening, I arranged to visit the Reynolds Fashions headquarters during off hours when the executive floor would be empty. The security guard, who had known me since I joined the company, looked confused when his computer showed my access had been revoked. "Must be a system error, Ms. Reynolds," he said, using his master key to let me in. I thanked him with a gift card to his favorite steakhouse, knowing this would likely be our last interaction. The office that had been my second home for 6 years now felt like a museum of broken promises. I efficiently packed personal items into 2 cardboard boxes: family photos, design awards, the fountain pen my father gave me when I became COO, reference books, and a few sentimental items from team celebrations. I deliberately left behind the plaque from our successful rebranding campaign and several framed articles featuring Reynolds Fashion's growth under my leadership. These were part of the company's history now, not mine to take. As I placed my office keys and company credit card on the desk, a strange lightness replaced the heaviness that had been crushing me for months. Whatever happened next was no longer my responsibility or concern. Before leaving, I sent a brief professional email to my former direct reports, thanking them for their dedication without mentioning my departure's circumstances. Many of them would soon be navigating significant changes as news of the ownership shift became public. The final step in my strategic response was booking a 3-week stay at a luxury resort in Bali. The transaction funds would take several days to clear, and I wanted physical and emotional distance when the inevitable fallout began. As my overnight flight took off the next evening, I switched my phone to airplane mode with a sense of having reclaimed control over my life. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for Reynolds Fashion's problems, my mother's approval, or my brother's failures. Instead of fighting a rigged game, I had changed the rules entirely. The beautiful irony? I had responded exactly as my mother instructed in her voicemail, with professionalism and dignity, just not in the way she had anticipated. The Balinese morning sun streamed through gauzy curtains as I sipped fresh mango juice on my private villa patio, overlooking terraced rice fields that stretched toward distant volcanic peaks. After 3 days of massages, meditation, and intentional disconnection from technology, I finally turned my phone back on. The cascade of notifications was immediate and overwhelming. 72 missed calls, 147 text messages, 36 voicemails, and over 200 emails. The missed calls told a story of escalating panic. 17 from my mother in increasing frequency, 23 from Marcus, several from board members, executives, and even company lawyers. The first voicemail from my mother, time-stamped just 3 hours after my understood text, maintained her business-like tone. "Olivia, we need to discuss transition details for your departure. Call me back immediately." By the fifth voicemail, recorded the following morning, her composure had cracked. "What have you done? The system is flagging ownership transfer paperwork. Call me now." The 10th message, left at 2:17 a.m., revealed full-blown panic. "This is completely irresponsible. You can't sell your shares without board approval. Our lawyers will contest this." My brother's messages followed a similar deterioration curve, starting with condescending lectures about emotional decisions and ending with desperate pleas. His final voicemail, left just before I turned my phone on, was almost unrecognizable, his voice hoarse and shaking. "Liv, please. Dad built this company for us. Kaplan will destroy everything. Mother hasn't slept in days. We can fix this. Whatever. You want board seat, operational control, new title. It's yours. Just please call us back." Reading through text messages revealed the chaotic aftermath at Reynolds Fashions. An emergency board meeting had been called, but deadlocked on how to respond to the sudden ownership change. Robert Kaplan had already sent his integration team to review operations, approved by his newly acquired 40% authority. Company stock, traded on a small exchange, had dropped 22% on news of the ownership shakeup. Several key accounts were reportedly putting orders on hold until leadership stabilized. My inbox contained frantic messages from Reynolds, fashions executives seeking clarity, headhunters suddenly interested in my availability, and business publications requesting interviews about what industry blogs were calling the Reynolds retail coup. The most surprising email came from Jean-Pierre at Lumiere, expressing regret over how our partnership negotiations had ended and indicating interest in working with whatever company I joined next. "Your vision was always what attracted us to the collaboration," he wrote. "The vessels change, but true creative insight remains valuable." Among the chaos, one message stood out for its different tone. My sister Rebecca had sent a simple text. "Heard the news. So proud of you for standing up for yourself. Call when you're ready. No rush. Love you." I forwarded Patricia the most, threatening legal messages, but her response was reassuring. "The sale was completely legal under the shareholder agreement. Their threats are empty. Enjoy your well-deserved break." Throughout that day, messages continued arriving. Several employees I had mentored sent discreet notes of support. One middle manager wrote, "The office is in complete disarray, but honestly, many of us are quietly cheering. What they did to you wasn't right." Industry contacts expressed surprise, but also admiration for the bold move. A business school classmate who had become a retail analyst sent a link to her newly published LinkedIn article titled "How Not to Handle Succession, the Reynolds Fashions Case Study." Financial news updates showed Reynolds Fashion stock continuing to decline as analysts questioned the company's stability. Robert Kaplan, meanwhile, had issued a press release highlighting his excitement about bringing fresh perspectives to a respected retail brand, carefully avoiding any mention of family drama while subtly signaling significant changes ahead. The most telling development came around day 5 of my Bali retreat. After dozens of increasingly desperate messages, my mother finally sent an email with a completely different tone. "Olivia, I realize we've made terrible mistakes in how we handled things. The business is suffering without you. Marcus is overwhelmed. Your father is distressed by the news. Please consider coming back to discuss rebuilding, whatever terms you want." The manipulation was transparent, invoking my father's condition to trigger guilt, offering vague promises without specific acknowledgement of wrongdoing, prioritizing business impact over our relationship. 6 months earlier, this approach might have worked. Now, from the peaceful distance of my Balinese villa, I could see it for what it was: another attempt at control, not reconciliation. I forwarded the email to Patricia without response. My mother's next tactic was predictable. She dispatched family friends and respected business associates to reach out on her behalf. Our longtime family attorney called, speaking carefully. "I'm not officially representing your mother in this matter, but as someone who's known you since childhood, I wanted to check if there's any path to resolution." I maintained polite, but firm boundaries with all these intermediaries. "I'm taking time to consider my next steps. I appreciate your concern, but this isn't open for negotiation right now." The attempted manipulation through my father was the most difficult to navigate. Marcus sent a photo of Dad looking confused and upset, claiming he was asking for me. This hit my one remaining vulnerable spot. My relationship with my father had always been special, and using his condition as leverage felt particularly cruel. I arranged a private video call with Dad's caregiver when my mother and brother would be at the office. Seeing his familiar face, now softened by illness but still with the kind eyes I remembered, brought tears. "They say you sold your part of the store," he said, his words slightly slurred but mind clearer than I expected. "I did, Dad. They pushed me out." His expression showed more comprehension than I anticipated. Always knew Vivian was too controlling. For her own good. "You'll build something better." Those words, from the man who had started it all, felt like permission to move forward without guilt. By the second week of my retreat, the frenzy of communication had settled into a steady hum of updates and inquiries. Business publications had moved on to newer dramas. Reynolds Fashions announced a strategic reorganization that industry insiders recognized as damage control. Robert Kaplan called once to assure me the transition was proceeding and to renew his job offer, which I politely deferred. This unexpected freedom from constant crisis management allowed me to reflect on what I truly wanted next. The financial security from the sale meant I could take time to choose my path rather than rushing into another position. The frantic reaction to my departure confirmed what I had suspected. My contributions had been far more valuable than my family had acknowledged. This realization wasn't about vindication, but clarity. I hadn't been the problem. As the third week of my retreat began, I felt ready to re-engage with the world on my own terms. The constant notifications had dwindled to manageable levels. My mother's messages had shifted from demands to awkward attempts at normal conversation. Marcus, however, continued alternating between anger and desperate reconciliation attempts. It was time to decide which relationships were worth salvaging and which boundaries needed to be permanent. My 3 weeks in Bali became the sanctuary I never knew I needed. Each morning began with yoga overlooking the ocean, followed by journaling that gradually transformed from processing anger to exploring possibilities. The resort's wellness director, a serene Indonesian woman named Inda, guided me through meditation techniques specifically for releasing betrayal and rebuilding self-trust. "Family wounds cut deepest," she observed during one session, "because they live in our foundation. But foundations can be reinforced, even after damage." This gentle wisdom helped me separate my identity from Reynolds Fashions more completely than 6 years of enmeshment had allowed. On my final day in Bali, I made the decision to return Marcus's calls, the only family contact I was ready to establish. Our first conversation was predictably difficult, with his emotions swinging between resentment and regret. "You could have talked to us instead of selling to our biggest competitor," he accused. "Like Mother talked to me before firing me by voicemail?" I countered calmly. After the initial defensiveness faded, something unexpected happened. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, Marcus spoke with complete honesty. "I've always been terrified of failing," he admitted. "You were so naturally good at the business side. Mother kept pushing me into bigger roles I wasn't ready for, telling me I needed to prove myself before Dad's condition worsened. Every time you succeeded, I felt more inadequate. This vulnerable admission opened a door to authentic conversation. Marcus acknowledged how our mother had methodically created competition between us, praising him to my face while criticizing him behind closed doors, then doing the reverse with me. "She's always needed to be the central power broker," he explained. "When you started gaining real influence with the executive team and vendors, she panicked. The voicemail wasn't even her original plan. She wanted to gradually reduce your authority until you left voluntarily." I listened without interrupting as years of family dynamics clarified. "The day after you sold your shares, she locked herself in Dad's study for hours," Marcus continued. "When she came out, she looked 10 years older. She kept saying she outmaneuvered me. George's daughter, indeed." There was a hint of admiration in his retelling that suggested my mother's respect, if not her affection, had finally been earned through the very act of leaving. After returning to Seattle, I declined to visit the Reynolds Fashions offices despite multiple invitations. Instead, I rented a comfortable apartment downtown and began consulting with family-owned businesses on succession planning and conflict resolution. The irony wasn't lost on me. My painful experience had created expertise that others found valuable. 6 months after my departure, Reynolds Fashions announced a major restructuring. Robert Kaplan hadn't attempted a hostile takeover as my mother feared. Instead, he brought professional management practices that the company desperately needed, while respecting its established brand identity. Quarterly earnings had stabilized, and several of my abandoned initiatives had been implemented under new leadership. My relationship with Rebecca deepened into the supportive adult sisterhood we'd never experienced growing up. We established a monthly tradition of weekend visits, alternating between her Portland home and my Seattle apartment. During one such visit, she revealed how our mother had tried to recruit her as an intermediary. "She couldn't understand why. I wouldn't help bring you to your senses," Rebecca laughed. "I told her you'd finally come to your senses, just not the way she wanted." The most unexpected development came nearly a year after my departure. My mother requested a meeting at a neutral location, the botanical garden my father had loved. I agreed with clear boundaries, bringing Rebecca as support. Mother arrived alone, looking noticeably aged but impeccably dressed as always. Her opening words surprised me. "I've been seeing a therapist. He suggested I might have some controlling tendencies." The understatement was so absurd that all three of us laughed, breaking the tension. What followed wasn't a complete reconciliation, but the beginning of a more honest relationship. "I won't pretend to approve of how you left," she said, "but I respect that you protected yourself. Your father always said you were the most like me, too stubborn for your own good." "I'm not interested in being like anyone but myself anymore," I replied. The conversation didn't heal decades of complicated dynamics, but it opened a possibility that hadn't existed before, relating to each other as adults with separate identities rather than extensions of family roles. Today, 2 years after that life-changing voicemail, my consulting practice helps family business owners create healthier succession plans. I serve on the boards of 2 retail companies that value my experience and insights. I've established boundaries with my family that allow for relationship without enmeshment. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the quietest response, like my single-word "understood" text, speaks volumes when backed by decisive action. What I originally perceived as the greatest betrayal became the catalyst for building an authentic life aligned with my values rather than others' expectations. For anyone facing similar family business challenges, remember that ownership takes many forms. Shares in a company, yes, but also ownership of your choices, your worth, and your future. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and self-respect? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences and the lessons they've taught me. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to breakthrough. May your own path forward be guided by both wisdom and courage.